Hey, this is Ben. Before your monthly preview of our subscriber only Extra Bad Gays, we wanted to let you know that season 8 is launching in just a couple weeks, and we have merch. It is launching today. We have socks that say Evil Twink Energy. We have caps that say Evil Twink Energy or Bad Gays. They are in black or pink or camo. We have new embroidered t-shirts. It's all great, and it's all online at badgayspod.com. So go check that out and enjoy the preview of Extra Bad Gays, which you can subscribe to at patreon.com/badgayspod.
There's been a lot of political news, and a lot of it will impact the LGBTQ community. I think maybe we're going to discuss some of that today.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is when we mentioned earlier, right, that the kinds of conversations that we have are unfortunately being made only more urgent by the times. I was thinking about that, there's that famous and wonderful essay by Gail Rubin called Thinking Sex. And she opens by writing that, quote, to some, sexuality may seem to be an unimportant topic, a frivolous diversion from the more critical problems of poverty, war, disease, racism, famine, or nuclear annihilation. But it is precisely at times such as these, when we live with the possibility of unthinkable destruction, that people are likely to become dangerously crazy about sexuality. And I think that's very true. And I think we see it being very true right now. What we wanted to talk about on today's show was a transatlantic reactionary backlash, specifically about trans people, in the wake of the dismaying reelection of Donald Trump to be the 47th president of the United States. In the US, at least, anti trans politics has seemed, until now, and I would argue even now, to be somewhat of an electoral loser. In 2022, there was a huge amount of fear that anti-trans advertising, and the Republican Party poured vast sums into anti-trans advertising, leading with, of course, the figure of women's sports and girls' sports. Side note, very funny to anyone who lived through the early 2000s when the Republican Party was constantly threatening to cut Title IX, which is what establishes funding for women's sports in the US, to see them suddenly care about women's sports and girls' sports, which
Right.
is not something that they ever gave a shit about. But there was a huge amount of funding that was poured into this, into fears about schools, into trying to get people onto school boards and banning books and all of this stuff. Another side note, of course, that the same reactionary centrist columnists who spent years talking about how, Oberlin-based dining hall cultural appropriation protests were the world's greatest danger to free speech had, of course, nothing to say when school systems started literally banning books. But again, back to the narrative. All of these things in 2022 seems to kind of fall flat. I mean, there was a very explicit campaign that was pioneered by these far right strategists, people like Chris Rufo, who talked very explicitly about their plan to basically make trans people and trans kids politically toxic. And of course, this campaign has to do with winning power in order to shove more money into the pockets of a very small number of extremely wealthy people. And in order to do that, there is just nothing that these people are not willing to do. And no people, these people are not willing to throw under the bus and to turn into the objects of hate and derision and scorn. It is important to note when I say that these anti trans politics had seemed to fall flat, I mean electorally. There were, in terms of policy making, many horrifying bills passed in many Republican controlled states over the past couple of years. Bills that are their most extreme entirely ban any form of youth transition, bills that ban schools from acknowledging gender transition whatsoever, bills that endanger all trans people's access to hormones and other forms of medical treatment. Really, really horrible stuff being passed in an increasing number of US states. Anti trans advertising, it infused a lot of the Trump reelection campaign. The most infamous one, I think, is this ad which goes through all of these different ways in which Kamala Harris was supposedly some sort of, communist radical. Ha ha ha. And then the ad ends with the slogan, Kamala is for they, them. Donald Trump is for us.
Right.
And that ad was found to be somewhat politically effective. There are some arguments about whether or not The ad was effective because of messaging about crime and sort of general social disorder, also obviously troubling messaging, right, with racist implications, or whether that ad was specifically effective because of the trans content. But in the wake of the election, basically before the powder was even dry, and by the way, the election result is actually extremely easy to understand. You have an avatar of an unpopular administration, an administration that has presided over inflation, which has made just about everyone's life materially worse, an administration which alienated all of its left wing supporters. There were many, young left wing people who turned out to vote for Joe Biden in 2020. None of them actually wanted Joe Biden to be president. And their reward for that was, the first 2 years, which were slightly better than anyone thought, and then the last 2 years, which was basically being repeatedly punched in the face while being forced to watch a live streamed genocide they were paying for and told that they had no choice but to pay for it.
Mm-hmm.
And then what happens? What happens is that Democratic turnout collapses, right? Biden 2020 would have beaten Trump 2024 somewhat comfortably, and Trump wins. And despite Trump winning, Democrats win elections in many crucial swing states, right? If Kamala Harris had won every state where Democrats won the next highest marquee
Down the ballot,
statewide
yeah.
race, whether that's Senate or governor, she would have won the White House. So it was a rejection of the Biden administration
And it's
to
been
not,
a terrible year for incumbent governments everywhere. In the
because
West, I
inflation
don't think
ruins life
any
worse.
has got back into power yet.
The only one who did recently was there were two. One was the Morena, the left wing party in Mexico, which has seemingly
Yeah.
been effective at building a popular base of support for what they're doing. Although there's a lot of critique of Morena and of kind of rosy views of Morena. And on the other hand, Pedro Sanchez in Spain, who remains the only center left politician in Europe who acts like he actually wants to win.
He's a very astute political operator, but very tellingly for the narrative that you're telling, of course, like he managed to keep inflation really low down. He kept it well under control through social democratic leftist, Keynesian spending policies.
Right. And guess what? Pedro Sanchez has not turned right on cultural issues to stay in power. And yet he ran re-election. Amazing. The sums of money flowing for U.S. politics mean that incentives there are unbelievably different than anywhere else. Like you can get extremely rich working in U.S. politics if you make ads, because if you make ads, you get consulting fees. Sometimes you control the media buying if you're the agency, right? The agency model. So you get a markup on all that media time. So $1 billion is being spent on media and you get the markup. Like there's a lot of money in
Yeah.
this. And the consultants get their beach houses whether the candidate wins or loses. And so you have this tremendous consultant driven failure, right? You have a failure of the Democratic Party to understand its own voter base and to deliver for its own voter base. You also have the blatant, obvious lie being perpetrated on everyone that Joe Biden is someone who is capable of finishing a sentence in the same decade he started it in. And I think the revelation of that, right? Like the first time anyone saw Joe Biden speak for more than 30 seconds without a teleprompter in 2 years at that debate, and everyone saw that Joe Biden was like visibly sundowning and unable to make a coherent case for himself and unable to communicate, which is part of the job. It makes you and your entire administration look like liars. It confirms that everything the Republicans have been saying about you is true. And it also kind of destroys your case that voting for the Democrats is this crucial act of democracy saving anti fascism. Because if you really believe that everything is at stake, you do not run someone like that for president. Like, if
Yeah.
you really believe that everything is at stake, you get rid of Joe Biden and have a primary, and you get someone who's able to make a convincing case. Um, and I truly do believe that, like, a random generic Democrat who won a primary, right, someone that I don't agree with particularly, but who just was a random, the governor of Michigan or something, would have won. Like, I
Yeah.
think Tim Walz would have won the election. I think Gretchen Whitmer would have won the election, right? Anyway, so all of that is the background to this. But of course, the consultants, the people who are sucking on this sort of endless teat of advertising revenue, do not want to give any of that up. Because if they give any of that up, then their children might have to go to public school, and that would be a horrible thing. And so they all in unison decided the problem was that the Kamala Harris campaign was quote unquote too woke, which is very funny if you watched the strategy of the Kamala Harris campaign, which was to campaign with Liz Cheney to talk about
Your
securing the
glove.
border.
She keeps under her bed. Yeah.
Like, sorry,
Yeah.
no one in the world believes that Kamala Harris has a Glock under her pillow. I'm like, that is bullshit.
Right.
Also, my favorite tidbit about the Kamala Harris campaign, her husband, Doug, um, said that when he found out that she had been made the candidate, he didn't answer his phone for an hour because he was at a spin class at Soul Cycle in West Hollywood with his buddies.
But this,
Was he, unable to take a call from his wife because he was at a spin class at Soul Cycle in West Hollywood with his buddies?
oh God, Ben, are we going to have to start doing a crowdfunder for legal fees?
I'm not saying anything at all. I'm just saying that he was at a Soul Cycle in West Hollywood by his own admission.
That's
And that
true.
is all that we know. Anyway, so everyone wanted this to blame this campaign for being too woke. And so then out pop sort of the most reactionary sorts of Democrats to declare that the problem with this campaign was trans people and to
Right.
blame trans people essentially for this national defeat. So there is a congressman from Massachusetts, unfortunately, named Seth Moulton. I'm about to send you a picture of Seth Moulton because I think to me he looks like if you asked an AI to make a congressman. Sending it over now.
Straight out of central casting. He's about to be kidnapped by a gang of terrorists or something. Or
Blue
yeah,
blue shirt, blue and red striped tie, black suit, sort of brill creamed hair.
yeah. I'd like the whitest male senator you've got, please. No, that's too white.
Yeah, congressman, not senator. God, he wants to be senator so
Oh shit.
bad. So anyway, literally the day after the election, like ballots are still being counted. This Seth Moulton type gives an interview to the New York Times for an article about why the Democrats lost, and he says, quote, Democrats spend way too much time trying not to offend anyone rather than being brutally honest about the challenges many Americans face. I have two little girls. I don't want them getting run over on a playing field by a male or formerly male athlete. But as a Democrat, I'm supposed to be afraid to say that. End quote.
Jesus Christ.
Now,
The reason that the Democrats lost is because for the last 40 or 50 years, they have been the face of the neoliberal system that has gutted American communities of decently paying, secure industrial jobs, which has left people sort of impoverished, insecure, unable to picture for themselves a future within society they live in, and feeling like that their voices are not heard within that society because their communities have been decimated. That's why they talk about trans is exactly the same in the UK. That's why these people talk about trans people, because what they don't want to talk about is the fact that they were part of the system that oversaw that decimation of those communities through deindustrialization and have profited off it and are the cause of it. And they won't be the ones to change it.